So I'm going to play a little bit with the ink and wash, and I just want to show you my setup. I brought a to-go container and grabbed a little bit of lake water actually, and I'm using the lid to hold some ink. And so okay, I have a couple size brushes, which is nice to have, but at the very least you have the one size. And I have a bamboo pen, which I don't think I'll use just yet, but it's here at the ready. And I have my pen and my nibs and that box that has matches. So having the full strength ink, and then I have a spot here where I was dabbing water to have a more diluted little bit of ink too. And you want to be able to figure out how much ink is on your brush at any given point. So it's good to have a gradient between like super pure dark ink and then just plain water and everything in between. It's also nice to have a paper towel to dab your brush if you need to, for when you're cleaning it especially. And I'm not doing a pencil drawing under, but I have my eraser sitting there from before. So I'm going to start with the darkest part of the scene and the basic early horizon line. And that helps me see just how much ink is on my brush too. So I can keep this wet edge here, just dabbing a little bit more water, and that way I can work back in with some ink and control it to some degree, or at least have the chance of knowing where I'm at. So in general, I've tried to capture the darkest shades and get a little bit of the near ground texture of these grasses out here, and then capture a bit of the distant horizon and the clouds above. This whole recording is 9 minutes, and I've fast forwarded through part of it to show you how I went about this painting. So this painting that I started with the simple sumi brush and India ink and water, I'm working back into it with this pen and ink, and I just dip the pen nib part way in there, and then I'm sure to rub the extra droplet off onto the side so I don't drip it onto the page. And then I'm quickly, still gesturally capturing some of the grasses, and I'll work back in up higher as this dries a little bit more, and emphasize certain lines to help add a little bit of detail and also darken some lines and add a little bit more to it. So the way that I work with the pen and ink is that I just want to not get too much ink over my nib, so I like to just use a couple drops, or even one drop is more than enough. And then I don't want to have any pooling up on the tip there, because that'll make a big ink drop on my drawing where I don't want it. So then I wipe off that excess, and then I can start to draw with full concentration of ink. So I hold the nib at this 45-degree angle. So now my pen is basically running dry. I'm not getting consistent marks as I move across the page, even though the page is slightly damp, which helps draw some of the ink out. So now instead of going for full straight ink, I'm just going to dip the nib in the water, and then again I'm making sure I don't have too much to where it would drop on my drawing. And you'd be surprised at how much power still is left in that ink. So you can get different shades of ink that way. You could also have on your palette some watered down ink that you pick up, whether with the dropper or just by dipping your pen into it. And it's okay for the ink to kind of get gummy on your palette there and for it to get thicker and thicker and dry out. You don't want that to happen on your nib or on your brush, but certainly dry effects can be really nice, and so you want to use the whole range from wet to dry. And I like to have a sort of darker area in my drawing where after I've picked up some ink, if I am not certain how much darkness is in it, how much power is in it, then I'll go to a section of my drawing that I know that I want to be dark and continue working there, because if the ink is lighter, that's no problem. But if it's super dark, then I haven't made a really dark mark in the middle of an area that I had intended to be lighter. So once I know exactly what's on my pen, I can work with it. But it's nice to have a little bit of control and understand where you're at, because overall the whole thing is quite fluid. But when we're working with the pen, we can definitely have more precision. This little bit of the point to the tip of this nib creates a rounded point at the end of each line. So as I'm trying to do a drawing of these grasses, I don't really want a rounded tip at the end of my lines. I want it to disappear into a sharp line. So I'm putting away this nib, and I've wiped it clean with a damp paper towel after I've swished it around in the water for a while. And then I've even taken a piece of paper and run it through that little space in between the brass part and the steel part to really clean out any ink that's stuck there, because you want to remove as much of that ink as possible so it doesn't build up and give you trouble later. After getting some of the more rounded lines there, I switched to this other nib that just has a simple point and no reservoir like the brass one. And that one does give me a little bit more of a thinner line, but it also runs out of ink very quickly. So you could see I had my first initial straight ink, and then I dipped in water and kept going until I basically had no ink left. And that was several different times for not a whole lot of line. But I also want to show you this bamboo pen. So there's two sides, and it's very similar to the other nibs in that there's a tiny hole and a slit that capillary action holds a bit of ink in there. But mostly I think the ink is just held by being on the surface of the pen. And normally I might use the ink from the bottle and drip a little bit, but I still have some ink on my palette that I'm looking to use up. So this is going to be extremely dark and fairly thick because I just picked it up, although not so thick because I picked it up from my palette instead of from the ink bottle. And already that's dried up, but if I take a little bit of water, and it could drip off if I'm not careful, but instead I'm going to just make the most of that big drip of ink and run with it along there. And you can see I've got a thinner line. And there's something about these bamboo brushes that creates a really beautiful line. And when you're using the ink from the bottle, it can go for quite a while. But there's a really beautiful nature to the line that it creates. So in these last few minutes before sunset, I'm going to just try to sketch on top of my drawing a little bit of how that sun feels coming through the sky. I'm going to have the darkest line at first, so I want to use it on the darkest part of my